My name is Megan Torres. I'm 31 years old, and the moment my mother tapped her fork against her champagne glass at her own birthday dinner, I knew she wasn't about to thank anyone for coming. She was about to perform. "I want to go around the table," she said, beaming at the 20-something relatives packed into my parents' dining room, "and say what makes me proudest about each of my children." She started with my older brother, Kevin. Kevin, my firstborn. Georgetown Law, partner track at 33, married to a wonderful woman, gave me the most beautiful grandbaby in the world. The table clapped. My aunt wiped her eyes. My father raised his glass. Then she turned to my sister, Diana. Diana, my firecracker. VP of Marketing before 40, drives a car I can't even pronounce, and never once made me worry about her future. More clapping. Diana pretended to be embarrassed but smiled like she'd rehearsed it. Then my mother looked at me. The pause alone told me everything. And Megan. She let the silence stretch just long enough for people to shift in their chairs. Megan is consistent. She found her calling, teaching children with special needs, and we are all very proud that she's passionate about something, even if that something comes with a salary. I could make selling candles on Etsy. She delivered it like a punchline, and the room treated it like one. Laughter rolled across the table. My father shook his head with that familiar grin and added, $80,000 in tuition, so she could earn less than a substitute. More laughter. Kevin didn't laugh, but he didn't say anything either. He just looked at his plate. Diana's husband, Marcus, leaned over to her and said, "Loud enough for me and everyone within 6 feet. At least our kids will know what ambition looks like." My Aunt Patricia, sitting directly across from me, gave me a pitying smile and said, "You were always the sweet one, Megan. Some people just aren't built for pressure, and that's okay." I remember the sound of ice shifting in someone's glass. I remember the chandelier light catching my mother's earrings as she tilted her head, waiting for me to do what I always did. Laugh it off, shrug, change the subject, and spend the drive home convincing myself it wasn't that bad. Instead, I set my napkin on the table, pushed my chair back slowly, grabbed my jacket from the hallway hook. My mother's smile faltered. "Oh, come on, Meg, we're joking." I looked at her, then at the rest of them, every face wearing that expression people get when they think cruelty is comedy because they're not the one bleeding. "By Easter," I said, "you're going to wish you hadn't laughed." That got the biggest laugh of the night. They thought I was being dramatic. They thought I'd cool off by Monday and call to apologize for ruining Mom's birthday. They thought I'd do what I had always done, absorb it, shrink, and come back smaller. They were wrong. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out that door and why my phone eventually showed over 90 missed calls, tell me what time is it where you are right now, and where in the world are you watching from? I always like knowing how far these stories travel. I made it to my car before the shaking started. Not crying shaking. The kind that starts in your hands and works inward until your whole chest feels like it's trying to decide between rage and grief. I drove 12 minutes to my apartment, a one-bedroom above a laundromat in Garfield Heights, and sat in the parking lot with the engine running because I wasn't ready to go inside and be alone yet, but I also wasn't ready to talk to anyone. The worst part wasn't what my mother said. It was how comfortable she was saying it. How natural. Like she'd been workshopping that line in her head all week and thought tonight was the right stage. My phone started buzzing before I'd turned off the ignition. Mom. Then Dad. Then Diana. Then Kevin, who hadn't defended me, but apparently felt qualified to mediate from a safe distance. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and let it vibrate against the leather until it sounded like a trapped insect. The voicemails came the next morning. My mother's was first. "Megan, you're being ridiculous. It was my birthday. Everybody laughs at those things. You're the only one who takes everything so personally." My father's was shorter, and somehow worse. "Call your mother. She's upset. Don't turn this into a whole production." Diana left a text, not even a voicemail. "Seriously? You stormed out over a joke? You embarrassed Mom at her own party." I read that one 3 times. I embarrassed her. The woman who ranked her children like products in a lineup had decided that my leaving was the humiliating part. By Saturday, I'd listened to every message twice. Not because I wanted to hear them again, but because the trained part of me, the part my family had spent 3 decades conditioning, still wanted to check. Maybe I did overreact. Maybe it was just a joke. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Then I'd remember Marcus's voice. At least our kids will know what ambition looks like. And the doubt would collapse under the weight of what actually happened. I went to work Monday morning the way I always did, early, because my students need consistency more than most kids, and I refuse to let anything outside that classroom follow me in. I teach a self-contained special education class at a public elementary school on the east side of Cleveland. 7 kids, ages 6 through 9, each with needs that require patience, creativity, and the kind of attention most people don't understand until they've sat on a floor for 40 minutes helping a nonverbal child communicate through picture cards. It's the hardest work I've ever done. It's the best work I've ever done. And it pays $41,000 a year, which in my family apparently makes me a cautionary tale. That week, the messages shifted. Not toward apology, toward blame redistribution. Kevin texted me, "Mom and Dad are fighting. Mom says Diana's husband went too far." Diana texted, "Dad's saying Kevin should have stepped in. Thanks for creating chaos." My Aunt Patricia sent a group text to the cousins saying someone needed to talk sense into Megan before this gets out of hand. Their unity collapsed in 4 days. It turns out when the person who absorbs all the cruelty stops showing up, the cruelty has to land somewhere else. And nobody in my family was used to being the target. I spent that first week doing something I'd never done before. Writing. Not lesson plans or IEP notes, writing for myself. I sat at my kitchen table after school each evening, laptop open, and put down words I had carried silently for years. I wrote about what it feels like to be the family benchmark for disappointment. I wrote about dinners where every question is really a comparison. I wrote about how some families don't need to raise their voices to make one child feel worthless. They just need the right tone, the right pause, the right audience. I didn't use names. I didn't mention the birthday. I titled it "When Loving Your Work Isn't Enough for the People Who Were Supposed to Love You." Then I posted it on a personal essay site I had bookmarked for months, but never had the nerve to use under my own name. I expected maybe 15 people to read it. By Wednesday, it had been shared over 1,000 times. Strangers left comments that made me cry at my desk during lunch. One woman wrote, "I'm a nurse, and my family still introduces me as the one who couldn't get into medical school." A man wrote, "I became a firefighter, and my dad still asks when I'm going to get a real job." For the first time since the birthday dinner, I didn't feel broken, I felt recognized. At school, my principal, Dr. Watkins, stopped me in the hallway that Thursday. She told me the district was creating a new position, a lead coordinator for the Autism Inclusion Pilot Program launching in 3 elementary schools next fall. Better pay, leadership title, district-wide impact. She thought I should apply. 6 months earlier, I would have said I wasn't ready, that my experience wasn't impressive enough, that someone more qualified would get it anyway. But something had shifted inside me since that dinner. The voice that used to talk me out of things sounded too much like my mother. And I was done letting her narrate my ambitions. I told Dr. Watkins I'd have my application in by Friday. My best friend, Janelle Carter, showed up at my apartment that Saturday with Thai food and a bottle of wine, and one look that told me she already knew. Janelle was a social worker who specialized in family mediation, which meant she had a clinical understanding of exactly how messed up my family dynamics were, and a personal policy of never pretending otherwise. "They did the thing again," she said. Not a question. A diagnosis. I told her everything. The toast, the rankings, Marcus, my aunt. The way my mother's voice on the voicemail carried more irritation than remorse. Janelle listened until I was done, then asked the question nobody in my family had ever thought to ask me. "What do you actually want, Megan? Not what would keep the peace. What do you want?" I didn't know at first. Then it came out before I could filter it. "I want one gathering in my life, where I don't have to audition for basic respect." She nodded like that was the most reasonable sentence in the world. "Then stop auditioning." 3 weeks after the birthday, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was cutting laminated picture cards for a new communication board, I got a phone call from an attorney named Richard Payne. He was polite and direct. He represented the estate of my grandmother, Gloria Torres. My abuela had passed the previous spring. Janto, but a public school teacher for 34 years in the same district where I now worked. She taught third grade in a building that had since been torn down, and she spent her summers tutoring migrant workers' children for free out of the church basement on Fulton Road. When she died, the family gathered for the funeral and spent most of the reception arguing over her jewelry and her dining table. I had spent the last year of her life visiting her every Sunday, not because anyone asked me to, but because she asked me to. We'd sit at her kitchen table sorting through boxes of old lesson plans, report cards she'd saved from students who wrote back decades later, photographs of class picnics, and a lifetime of letters from parents, thanking her for seeing their children when no one else did. She used to hold my hand and say, "Megan, teaching is not a backup plan, it's a calling. And the people who don't understand that are the ones who never had a teacher who changed their life." I assumed Mr. Payne's call was about some leftover paperwork, maybe a document I'd helped her organize that the family needed. It wasn't. "Your grandmother established a trust before her death," he told me. "There's a property and a financial reserve attached to it. She specifically named you as the sole trustee. I'd like to schedule a meeting to go over the details in person." I stood in my classroom holding a pair of blunt scissors and a laminated picture of a yellow school bus, trying to understand what he was telling me. "Me?" I said. "Not my father? Not Kevin?" "You," he said, exclusively. The meeting took place the following week in a small law office downtown, with soft lighting, leather chairs, and a bowl of butterscotch candies nobody touched. My parents were there. Kevin came in a suit, like he expected to negotiate. Diana and Marcus sat together looking polished and tense. My Aunt Patricia had somehow gotten herself invited and positioned herself near my mother like a backup singer. When I walked in, my mother looked startled. Not happy startled. My father's jaw tightened. Diana wouldn't look at me. Marcus had that familiar smirk people wear when they still think they're above you even while sitting in an attorney's conference room. Mr. Payne didn't waste time. My grandmother's estate had distributed most personal items months earlier. But the major remaining asset was the property on Fulton Road, the old church building she had quietly purchased 15 years ago when the diocese sold it. It had been converted into a small community learning center that leased space to a tutoring nonprofit, a children's literacy program, and a weekend ESL class. The building generated rental income. The property had appreciated significantly. Attached to it was a reserve account my grandmother had built over decades of careful saving. The trustee of all of it was me, not my father, not the family collectively, me. My father actually laughed. One short disbelieving sound, like the lawyer had told a joke that didn't land. "There must be some error," Marcus said. "There wasn't. Mr. Payne continued in the same measured tone. "The trust gave me sole discretion over how the property and reserve funds were managed. There were no automatic distributions to any family member. My grandmother had structured it that way deliberately." Then the temperature in the room changed. Because what Mr. Payne said next revealed why everyone had really been calling me for weeks. My father's contracting business had taken on a project that went over budget by 6 figures. He was behind on a line of credit. Kevin's firm was stable, but his personal spending wasn't. He and his wife had over-leveraged on a house renovation and needed a bridge loan. Diana and Marcus's marketing consultancy had lost 2 major clients, and they were 3 months behind on their office lease. My Aunt Patricia had co-signed something for her son that had gone sideways. They hadn't been calling me because they felt guilty about the birthday. They'd been calling because they knew about the trust. They knew Abuela's property might be the only thing standing between them and real financial trouble. And the one person who controlled access to it was the daughter they had turned into a punchline over cake and champagne. Mr. Payne slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Gloria left a letter for Megan to read privately," he said. "But she authorized me to share the guiding principle she wrote into the trust document." He read it aloud. "I am entrusting this to the only member of my family who understands that a person's worth is not measured by their salary, but by their service. Megan has my heart. I trust her to use this wisely." Marcus stopped smirking. Diana went pale. My mother began crying instantly, which might have moved me if I hadn't watched her weaponize tears my entire life. My father leaned forward and said the most revealing thing he could have said. "Megan, obviously we need to discuss this as a family." As a family, that word again. Family when they needed access. Sensitive when I objected. Dramatic when I hurt. Family when they needed a signature. I took the letter home before I opened it. I wanted to be alone with whatever my grandmother had chosen to say to me. I made chamomile tea, sat on my couch with a blanket over my legs, and unfolded 4 pages of her careful, slanted handwriting. She wrote that she had watched more closely than I realized. She wrote that every family builds an unspoken hierarchy, and that I had been placed at the bottom not because I lacked talent but because I lacked the willingness to be cruel. She wrote that my work as a teacher made her prouder than any law degree or corner office ever could, and she was sorry she hadn't said it louder while she was alive. Then came the line that broke me open. "You do not owe rescue to people who would not have rescued your dignity. Use this gift to build something they never gave you peace." I cried until my tea went cold. Not because of the money or the building or the title of trustee, because someone in my family had finally named what had happened to me, without adding, "But they love you at the end." The next morning, the calls started in earnest. Dad. "Hey, sweetheart, I've been thinking, and I was out of line. We all were. Please call me." Mom, crying so hard her words smeared together. "I didn't mean it, Meg. You know I'm proud of you. We're family." Diana. "Megan, this isn't a game. We need to talk." Marcus, who had never once called me directly in his entire life. "Can we at least sit down like adults?" Kevin sent a text that was 3 paragraphs long and mentioned the word family 11 times. By sundown, I had 93 missed calls, 19 voicemails, and enough text messages to prove my grandmother had been right. Their respect arrived attached to a balance sheet. I didn't respond to any of them. Diana was the first to try a different approach. She texted 4 words on a Wednesday morning. "Can we get coffee?" Not Mom wants. Not Dad says. Just her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a diner on neutral ground, halfway between our neighborhoods, the kind of place with sticky menus and coffee that's been sitting too long, but at least nobody could stage manage the scene. She looked terrible when she walked in. Not television. Terrible. Real terrible. Foundation applied in a hurry, dark circles barely covered, jaw clenched like she'd spent days bracing for something she couldn't control. For a second, seeing her like that almost softened me. Then I remembered Marcus's voice at the table. "At least our kids will know what ambition looks like." We ordered coffee. Neither of us drank much. Diana started with the line I expected. "I'm sorry." I said nothing. "No, I mean it. I'm really sorry." Still nothing. Then she looked at me and said the thing that told me this wasn't about me at all. "Mom is losing it, Megan." I almost stood up. "Diana, if this conversation is you managing Mom's emotions, I'm leaving." She flinched, then nodded. "Okay, fair." She took a breath. "Then I'll tell you what's actually going on." What came out over the next 20 minutes was uglier than I'd imagined and somehow less surprising. My parents had known for months that Abuela's property might be the family's only financial safety net. My father assumed he'd inherit control automatically because he was the eldest son. Marcus had been especially cruel at the birthday because he was terrified about their business and wanted someone lower in the family pecking order to absorb his anxiety. My mother had been drinking before dinner and decided mocking me would lighten the mood, the way it always had. Diana admitted she'd laughed because when our mother targeted someone else, the safest place to stand was beside her. Then came the part where Diana stopped sounding strategic and started sounding honest. "Mom told me to come here," she said, twisting her napkin until it nearly tore. "She said if I didn't fix things with you, I shouldn't expect any help when the consultancy goes under." There it was. The entire family system in one sentence. Loyalty purchased through fear. Affection rationed by usefulness. Even now, with everyone panicking, my mother was still turning her daughters into instruments. I asked Diana one question. "If Abuela hadn't made me trustee, would any of you be apologizing right now?" Her silence lasted longer than the question. Then she whispered, Not like this. That hurt more than the laughter at the birthday. Not because I didn't know it, but because hearing it spoken out loud made denial impossible. Diana started crying. Not theatrically, not loudly. The exhausted, ashamed kind of crying people do when the version of themselves they've been maintaining finally cracks. She told me Marcus had started blaming her for not keeping the peace. She told me Dad was furious at Abuela for rewriting the family order from the grave. She told me Mom had called me ungrateful one minute and our only hope the next. She told me relatives had found my essay, someone recognized the family even without names, and now cousins were asking questions nobody in the house wanted to answer. "Are you trying to punish us?" Diana asked. I looked at her for a long time. "No. I'm trying to stop volunteering for punishment." We sat in silence after that. For once, there was nothing performative left to say. When the check came, Diana reached for it. I paid first. Not to prove a point, but because I was tired of being cast as the sister who always needed something. At the door, she touched my arm. "I don't know how to fix this," I believed her. "You don't undo 31 years over one cup of coffee. You start by telling the truth," I said. "Then you live differently." That weekend, the family requests became more desperate, more direct, and less disguised. My father sent financial documents. My mother sent scripture. Marcus sent a message explaining their business cash flow like I was an investor he could charm. Aunt Patricia left a voicemail calling me power drunk, which is a remarkable thing to say to someone you're also begging for money. I ignored all of it and spent Sunday morning reviewing trust documents with Mr. Payne. I asked him what my legal obligations were. He explained them carefully. I was required to manage the trust in its best interest, not in the emotional interest of adults who had confused entitlement with inheritance. My grandmother had built it that way on purpose. On my way home, I stopped at a garden center and bought a small potted rosemary plant for my kitchen windowsill. My abuela always kept one. She said rosemary was for remembrance, and I figured this apartment could use something that remembered where I came from without repeating the damage. The week before Easter, my mother sent a message so different from her previous ones that I knew someone had helped her write it. "We would like to have one conversation. No pressure, just to hear you." That no pressure carried more weight than the rest of the sentence. I almost deleted it. Instead, I replied with conditions. Their house. Daytime. 1 hour. No alcohol. No surprise guests. Mr. Payne copied on any discussion of the trust. My father responded with a thumbs-up emoji, like we were confirming a lunch reservation instead of dismantling a 30-year family myth. I went because I wanted one thing: they had never voluntarily given me a room where the truth stayed in the air after it was spoken. When I walked in, nobody was holding a drink. Good. Kevin was there, pale and quiet. Diana came without Marcus. Aunt Patricia was not invited, which told me even my parents knew when to stop performing. My mother stood up immediately and started crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't tell her it was okay. I sat down. For the first 15 minutes, they did what families like mine always do when consequences finally corner them. They apologized in vague, sweeping language designed to make pain sound accidental. Mistakes were made. Things got out of hand. We all said things. My father said, "You know we love you." My mother said, "You've always been more sensitive than your brother and sister." Diana said, "Everyone was stressed." Every sentence orbited the truth without touching it. So, I forced a landing. "No," I said. "Say what happened." Silence. I looked at my mother. "What did you say at your birthday dinner?" Her face crumpled. "Megan, say it." She whispered it back to me, almost word for word. The ranking. The Etsy line. The pause she'd left like a comedian setting up a bit. Except now, repeated in this room, it sounded ugly even to her. I looked at my father. "What did you add?" He stared at the floor, then muttered, "That we spent $80,000 on your education for you to earn less than a substitute." I turned to Diana. "What did Marcus say?" She shut her eyes. "That at least his kids would know what ambition looks like." Kevin spoke then. For the first time. I should have said something. I just sat there. That was the first honest sentence anyone had spoken all afternoon. My mother tried to recover the room. We never meant for you to cut us off over one dinner. And there it was. The reduction, the revision, the desperate need to compress years of damage into a single bad night. This isn't about one dinner, I said. This is about 31 years of teaching me that my place in this family was at the bottom of the list. The birthday was just the first time I refused to stay there. Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue with. Then my father made his mistake. So, what happens now? He asked. Are you really going to let this building destroy the family? Not can we repair this? Not what do you need from us? The building. The money. At least he saved me time. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photocopy of my grandmother's letter, the section I'd chosen to share. I read the line that mattered most out loud. You do not owe rescue to people who would not have rescued your dignity. When I finished, the room was silent for 10 seconds. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked like he'd been slapped by someone who wasn't in the room anymore. For once, my grandmother's voice was louder than all of theirs. I'm not distributing trust funds to anyone, I said. Not now. Possibly not ever. The building will remain in trust. The rental income will be managed responsibly. I'm exploring using a portion to establish an education fund in Abuela's name for young teachers entering special education. But it will not be used to bail out people who laughed while I was being humiliated. My mother started sobbing. My father stood and paced. Diana stared at me like she was hearing a language she'd always known existed, but never learned to speak. Then my mother said the line Janelle had predicted someone in my family would eventually use. If you shut us out like this, she cried, I don't even know what reason I have to celebrate Easter. The old Megan would have buckled. The old Megan would have rushed to comfort the woman who had just spent a month proving that her love came with financial conditions. But I had spent weeks rebuilding myself from the inside out, using truth as the foundation. And truth is stronger than guilt once you've practiced it long enough. Then maybe this is the year you learn the difference between a celebration and a performance, I said. That was the moment the room shifted. Not because I won. Not because they were fixed. Because for the first time, I was not negotiating against my own self-worth. I stood, put on my jacket, and gave them the only terms I was willing to offer. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will have nothing to do with the trust. It starts with accountability. No jokes about my salary, my apartment, my career, my life. No ranking your children in public. No calling me too sensitive when I object. If any of it happens again, I leave. No discussion. Diana nodded first. Kevin nodded second. My father said nothing. My mother whispered, please don't go. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't just see my mother. I saw a woman who had spent decades confusing control with closeness and was now stunned that one of her children had stepped outside the hierarchy. I'm already gone from the version of this family that needed me at the bottom, I said. What comes next depends on all of you. Then I left. On Easter Sunday, I stayed home. That sentence would have gutted me a year earlier. Now it felt like freedom. I made my abuela's arroz con pollo from a recipe card I'd found in one of her boxes, burned the first batch of tostones because I got distracted reading comments on my latest essay, and sat cross-legged on my living room rug, with the windows open and the rosemary plant catching the late afternoon light. Outside, a couple on the sidewalk argued gently about which bakery made the better tres leches. A kid on a bicycle rang his bell for no reason. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing old salsa music just loud enough to hear through the wall. It wasn't a fancy Easter, it was a quiet one. And I had learned, finally, that quiet is not the same thing as lonely. My phone buzzed a few times that evening. I let most of it sit. One message was from Kevin. A photo of him eating leftover ham alone in his kitchen because, he wrote, Mom canceled dinner. Dad's in the garage pretending to organize tools. Diana and Marcus aren't speaking. Another was from Janelle. Proud of you. Save me some rice. Mr. Payne sent a short email confirming the trust paperwork was fully filed and that no emergency access requests would override my authority. Clean. Professional. Final. Then, just after 7, my mother sent a message unlike any she had sent before. Not please answer, not we're family, not it was a joke. Just this. I spent your whole life measuring you against the wrong things. I don't know when I decided money mattered more than kindness, but I did, and I am ashamed. I don't expect tonight to change anything. I stared at it for a long time. A few minutes later, my father sent one too. No ask. No defense. Your grandmother saw you more clearly than I ever did. I made you feel small, so I could feel like I was in charge of something. That wasn't parenting. I'm sorry. Were those messages enough? No. Not for what had been done, not for the years behind it. But they were more honest than anything they had said in the frantic weeks before. Maybe desperation had finally burned through performance. Maybe consequences had done what love alone never could. Or maybe this was just the first crack in a wall that should have come down decades ago. I didn't romanticize it. I didn't call it healing. I called it a beginning. And even that felt generous. I opened my laptop that night and wrote one last essay before midnight. Not for revenge. Not to expose anyone. To mark the moment. I wrote that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same word. I wrote that some of us are raised to believe love means enduring humiliation with a polite smile, and that unlearning that belief feels like grief because you're not just losing people, you're losing the fantasy that they were ever going to treat you with dignity without being forced to. I wrote that boundaries are not betrayal. Silence is not selfishness. Distance is not cruelty, when distance is the first place your body has ever learned to stop bracing for impact. Then I wrote the truest sentence I had found all year. Family is not measured by who sits at your table. It's measured by who would never use your pain as the entertainment. Before I posted it, I added a paragraph about my grandmother. I wrote that she had left me more than a building. She had left me evidence that someone had seen me accurately. Evidence that being underestimated by the wrong people does not make you worthless. Evidence that generosity without boundaries eventually becomes permission for disrespect. In the weeks that followed, I began working with Mr. Payne to direct a portion of the trust's rental income toward a small annual grant in my grandmother's name, the Gloria Torres Fellowship for Early Career Special Education Teachers in the Cleveland Public School District. Something useful. Something lasting. Something built from love instead of guilt. Around 9 that Easter night, Diana called. I almost let it ring. Then I picked up. She didn't launch into panic. She just said, I wanted to hear your voice and make sure you were okay. I'm okay, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then admitted Easter had fallen apart before it started. Dad and Marcus argued. Mom cried in the kitchen. Aunt Patricia called to complain that cousins had read the essay and were asking uncomfortable questions. Diana said, almost laughing at the absurdity. Nothing works anymore. It's not supposed to work the old way, I told her. She asked if I hated them. I thought about it honestly, before answering. No, I said. But I'm done protecting everyone from the consequences of how they treated me. She cried a little, softly. Then said she understood, and for the first time in my life, I thought she might actually mean it. When we hung up, I looked around my apartment. The secondhand bookshelf stuffed with children's literature and teaching manuals. The chipped mug by the sink with a faded apple on it that a student had painted for me 2 years ago. The stack of application materials for the coordinator position I intended to earn. The rosemary plant in the window, catching the last of the light. Nothing about this apartment would impress my family. They'd still call it small, temporary, not enough, but it was mine. And inside that small, warm space, I felt something I had never once felt at their enormous dining room table with the chandelier and the champagne and the rankings. Dignity. That was the real ending. Not the trust, not the missed calls, not the panic in their voices when they realized I could no longer be reached on the old terms. The real ending was that I finally understood something people like my mother rely on. You never figuring out that your peace is more valuable than your position in someone else's cruel version of family love. So yes, weeks after my mother mocked me at her birthday dinner, they begged me to answer. But the question that mattered was never whether I picked up the phone. It was whether I would pick up the old version of myself, the one who apologized for being hurt, who sat through public humiliation and called it loyalty, who kept confusing access with love. And the answer, finally, was no. I can forgive without funding dysfunction. I can care without climbing back into the same cage. I can love my family and still refuse the version of love that asks me to shrink so everyone else can feel tall. That Easter, I didn't get a miracle. I got something better. I got clarity. I got boundaries. I got a future that no longer depended on being chosen by people who only noticed my worth when ignoring it started costing them something. And I want to leave you with this. If the people closest to you are only comfortable when you are quiet, ashamed, or easy to mock, then walking away is not the cruelest thing in the room. Sometimes it's the first honest thing. Tell me in the comments, would you have answered the phone, or would you have protected your peace? If you ask me, this story is really not about revenge. It's about a woman who finally realized that protecting her peace is not selfish, it is necessary. What makes this story powerful is that Megan didn't scream, beg, or try to prove her worth to anyone. She simply stopped allowing people to treat her pain like entertainment. That quiet strength made the outcome even more satisfying. Sometimes the strongest response isn't anger, it's clarity and boundaries. What about you? If you were in Megan's place, would you answer the phone and give your family another chance? Or would you choose to protect your peace?